Hello, everyone. My name is Mark Berez, and I'm the president of TOLI, the Olga Lengel Institute for Holocaust Studies and Human Rights. Today, we have a special program with author Silvia Foti and her new book. Before that, we have a 1-minute video about TOLI for those not familiar with our work. We will continue in a minute.
TOLI's mission is to provide teachers with professional training in Holocaust education so that they can apply its lessons to the classroom and community. TOLI's seminars take place across the U.S. from Mississippi to Montana with the flagship program in New York. We also have teacher seminars in 10 European countries, and to date over 3,000 educators have taken part in TOLI's seminars. At a time where knowledge of the Holocaust is fading, anti-Semitism, racism, and intolerance is on the rise, TOLI's programs provide an essential resource. Our motto, "Never Again," begins in the classroom. It's one we take very much to heart.
Hello again. We are pleased to welcome Silvia Foti, a Chicago school teacher and writer. Her new book was published yesterday, The Nazi's Grandfather: How I Discovered My Grandfather Was a War Criminal. What began as a deathbed promise to her mother to write about the grandfather, a legendary World War II hero in Lithuania, took her on a 20-year journey that upended a family myth and created national controversy. It is so powerful book, so personal and so precise in history. Silvia's story has sparked an international controversy featured in the New York Times. The book is available online and in stores. Also with us is Arthur Berger, a retired American diplomat and former senior executive at the U.S. Holocaust Museum. He is also a member of TOLI's board of directors. Silvia, please tell us how you came to write your book and the remarkable journey you took in doing so. Thank you.
Hi, Mark. So nice to be here. I'm so happy to be invited. I'm going to do something I haven't done in a long time in these presentations. I am going to share my screen and have a PowerPoint presentation, I hope. So, just trying to get this to work. Oh gosh, this is so funny. Okay. It's like everything's, I wanted to. So my book took me about 20 years to write. When I started the story about my grandfather, I only knew a few things about him. I knew that he was a World War II hero in Lithuania. I knew that he had died in a KGB prison in 1947 at the age of 36. I knew that he had led a rebellion against the Soviets in 1945 to 1946. This is when he called himself General Storm. He was really a captain in the Lithuanian army, but it was his nom de guerre. He was in a Nazi concentration camp from 43 to 45. And the story I heard was that he was there to help Jews as I was growing up. He was head of the Cholet district during the Nazi occupation from 1941 to 43. And in 1941, he led the uprising against the Soviets, and he won. So this is more or less what I grew up in Chicago in Market Park, which is known as Little Lithuania. I was very proud of him. In 1997, after Lithuania got its independence in 1990, my mother was asked to go to Lithuania to get the Cross of the Vytis. And she did that. And this is the highest honor you could receive posthumously. So she received this Cross of the Vitis for her father from President Brazauskas. And there I am with my brother and other dignitaries on that day. So, you know, he has a school named after him. He has streets named after him. He's got plaques on buildings. So it was just one thing after another, and he was practically a legendary hero there. So in the year 2000, my mom, at the age of 60, was on her deathbed. And it was sort of a shock for all of us because she was so young. But she had been working on this book for more than 40 years. And she had collected so much material on him. And anyway, she called me over to her bedside and she said, Sylvia, you have to write the book. And of course I knew which book she was talking about, but you know, at first I said, no, you know, you're going to write it yourself. But eventually I said yes. And when I came back the next day, she had already gone into a coma. So at this point, here I was pretty much stuck with this insane deathbed promise. Shortly after that, my grandmother was on her deathbed. My grandmother survived my mother by about 5 months. And it was July 2000 now. And my grandmother is in bed and she calls me to her bedside and she says, how's the book going, Sylvia? And I said, it's going fine. You know, I'm young. I was 38 years old then. I'm a journalist. I'll get it done. I'm not going to let it go the way Mom did. And I thought I was giving her words of comfort to tell her this because, you know, I thought she was waiting for this book to come out. And she looks at me and she says, don't write the book. Just let history lie. There's no need to dig around. And I couldn't figure out why she was saying that. And I said, of course I have to write the book. I promised Mom I would write the book. And she didn't like my answer. And she just kind of turned toward the wall and, you know, gave me her back. And that was kind of the end of that conversation. And I thought I would pick it up on another day. But when I returned, she had gone into a coma. So I never knew why, you know, at that point, I didn't know yet why she said that. I didn't know of my grandfather's role in the Holocaust yet. I thought she was just trying to give me a pass at this huge project that my mother left me, you know, that my mother had been kind of stressed out over for 40 years. And I thought maybe she just thought, you know what, maybe you don't have to do it just because it's too hard. So this is her with my grandfather when they were dating, just horsing around. I like this picture. And so that's her when she was very young. They both wanted to be buried in Lithuania. And so in October, my brother and I took their cremains to Lithuania. And very many people came, you know, because more because of our grandfather, I think, in honor of General Storm, you know, to pay last respects to his wife, my grandmother, to his daughter, my mother. And the first president of Lithuania had come, you know, we were just so honored that he was there. So, you know, it was quite a big event. We chose October 8th because it was the 90-year memorial birthday of Jonas Noreika. After that, we were asked to visit the school named after my grandfather. And and then after the funeral, this Viktoras Ošmenskas, who was in the KGB prison with my grandfather, took us to this building, this Wroblewski Library. And it's in Vilnius. And behind like one of these pillars is this plaque for my grandfather. And it was put up like in October 2000. And it says, in this building, 1945 to 1946, worked a noteworthy resistor, Lithuania's National Council and Lithuania's Armed Forces organizer and leader, Jonas Noreika, General Storm, shot February 26, 1947. We put a little wreath of flowers there. And then the next day, we were invited to visit the school named after my grandfather, the Jonas Noreika Grammar School, which is in Šikoniai, the northern side of Lithuania. And, on our way there, there's a little sign in blue that says birthplace of Jonas Noreika. And this is the school. And then here's a monument there near the school where we had gathered afterwards. But when we came to the school, we were greeted by the children who were holding flowers and singing Lithuanian songs and, really greeted so grandly. And we go inside and the director takes us to his office. And he says to me, how's the book going, Silvia? And I said, it's going fine. He says, I'm so glad you took it over from your mother. You're such a good daughter. And I said, thank you. And I said, as long as I'm here, why don't you tell me how you named the school after my grandfather? I thought I would start some research for my book. And he says, before we had this horrible Russian name because Lithuania was occupied by the Soviet Union from the end of World War II to 1990. And he said, after 1990, when Lithuania got its independence, we wanted a really good Lithuanian patriotic name. And since your grandfather was born in this town and he's such a magnificent hero, of course we decided to name the school after him. And I thought, okay, that makes sense. And I thought that would be the end of the story. But then he pulls me to the side and he says, but I got a lot of grief over naming the school after your grandfather. And I said, grief from who? And he says, grief from the Jews. And I said, what could the Jews possibly say about my grandfather? And, this is such an open secret there, I guess, that he looked at me and he couldn't believe I didn't know. And he said so casually, well, he was accused of killing Jews. And when he said that, that was the very first time I had heard it. And, I felt like I was just punched in the gut. And I really had to sit down and sort of compose myself and catch myself. And this is the director right here toward the end. Boleslavas Telekelpsha is his name. And he says to me, don't worry, it's all in the past. It's just communist propaganda. So after that, we went back to Chicago, and in Chicago, I talked to my father and family and parents' friends. And I said, have you ever heard the story about Jonas Noreika killing Jews? And many of them did. And I was shocked that they did and that I didn't. I said, how come you never told me about it? And they said, well, it's not true. It's just communist propaganda. And the Russians just don't want Lithuania to have any heroes. So I embraced that story. And I myself stayed in denial for about 10 years. And but I was also a journalist, and I got to the point where I realized I couldn't just ignore the story. So I was hoping to exonerate Jonas Noreika and put the rumor to rest once and for all. So I started to kind of dig into that period, and I came across a document that started to really change everything. He wrote this in 1933 at the age of 22. And it says, Pakel Galva Lietuvi, which means raise your head, Lithuanian. And it's 32 pages. And it's a little like booklet. And I, opened it up. I'm like, okay, what am I going to find here? I thought it was just going to be, a patriotic pamphlet. But I started opening it up and reading it, and it's really about the Jews and how they took over the country, how they have the best positions, how they're the foreigners, how Lithuania should be for Lithuanians, and how Lithuanians should just start boycotting everything that the Jews are selling. And it just was on and on like this for 32 pages. So when I finished reading it, you know, I really wanted to burn the thing. And but on here, I know you can't see it here. It's written in my grandmother's handwriting, 22 metų vyrukas, 22-year-old young man. And it was as if my grandmother had, you know, appeared before me and said, he was just 22, you know, he was a hothead. It doesn't really call for killing them. So I kind of, you know, rested on that a little bit, but I still, you know, was extremely uneasy about this. Shortly after that, though, I came across a document that really changed everything and changed my focus completely. And this was when he was the Cholet district chair, and he signed it August 22nd, 1941. And it's the word, you know, he signed a lot of documents concerning Jews. On the jonasnoreika.com website, there are like 68, 69 documents concerning Jews. He signed about 1,000 during that period, but 68 or 69 are about Jews. This is the worst one. And he's calling for all Jews and half Jews to be rounded up in the Cholet region and to be brought to a ghetto in Żagadę. And there were more than 2,000 people. And they had to be brought to Żagadę by August 29th. And there's another document where the mayor of Żagadę is asking my grandfather for barbed wire to help it, you know, create the ghetto, and oh, include some nails. This is where, you know, it didn't take me long to find out what happened to these 2,000 Jews in this ghetto, and they were slaughtered in October on Yom Kippur. And so once I sort of really absorbed what happened with this document, this is where I changed everything. And I decided to make the Nazi occupation a primary focus of the story. And at this point, I knew I wasn't going to be able to exonerate him. So I just spent a long time researching and writing. You know, it took me a long time to do it. I was doing other things, raising 2 children. I switched careers from being a journalist to a high school teacher so that I could have my summers off to work on this story. And in 2013, I ended up going to Lithuania for 7 weeks. This is where, you know, I found a lot of information, which is all in the book. But, you know, this is where I learned that he had given orders to kill 2,000 Jews in Plungę, about another 2,000 in Telšiai, and about another 4,000 in the Cholet region, to where it ended up being like he's responsible for a conservative estimate of about 8,000 Jews. So I never found any evidence that he actually pulled the trigger himself. And this is a big argument among Lithuanians, that he never actually pulled the trigger. But, you know, I came across the term desk murderer, and I do think it applies to him. I think he was anti-Semitic. I think he did everything he could to help the Nazis. And that's what my story's about. So that's the end of my presentation. And at this point, I wanted to invite Arthur.
Thank you, Silvia. And I could feel that your presentation was heartrending. Your search for the truth, I didn't put on the video. There we go. Your search for the truth about your grandfather, Jonas Noreika, brings us really to the current conflict of conscience in Lithuania. Today, Lithuania is an active member of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, and the Lithuanian government has committed itself to the 3 pillars of IRA, or the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance: education, remembrance, and research. This is not Jewish education. This is not Jewish remembrance. This is not Jewish research. This is national. And the purpose is to fight against Holocaust denial and distortion and to educate the next generation. For over 3 centuries, Jewish life in Lithuania was vibrant, respected, and influential. Yet anti-Semitism was part of the daily life of the Jews. And as you bring out in your book, Silvia, the stereotypes and the distrust of Jews was prevalent as it is Holocaust denial and distortion. In pre-war Lithuania, there were almost 200,000 Jews, almost half of them in Vilnius. Hundreds of synagogues, the largest and most famous yeshivas of all of Europe, the Ponevezh, the Telz, the Mir, Slobodka, and with the exception of the Mir yeshiva, almost all the rabbis, teachers, and students from those yeshivas were murdered. And the Mir yeshiva was rescued only because of the life-saving visas given by Japanese diplomat Juni Sugihara. Now, where did Jewish life come from in Lithuania? Basically, it started 7 centuries ago, but it was in and out. Jews were deported and they were welcomed back. But since the 18th century and the arrival of the Vilna Gaon Eliyahu, who was the leader of the Jews, Jewish learning became primary. He was opposed to the Hasidic way of prayer and Jewish life and learning, and he felt that intensive learning of the Torah and the Talmud was the way to go. Well, we know that this continued until the Holocaust. So what happened in the Holocaust? We know that the Germans' army invaded and occupied Lithuania June of 1941. But what we do know from the history also is that there were violent riots against Jews before and after the arrival of the German army. Not by Nazis, but by Lithuanians who believed in the Nazi philosophy. And in June and July of 1941, right after the German army occupied Lithuania, the Einsatzgruppen, or mobile killing squads, and their Lithuanian collaborators began murdering the Jews of Lithuania on a massive scale. By the end of August 1941, most Jews in the rural part of the country had already been murdered. And by November 1941, most of the rest of the Lithuanian Jews in the ghettos of the larger cities had also been murdered. Not in gas chambers, not deported to killing centers, but in or near the cities and villages that they had lived in for centuries. Now, the Jewish community was diverse. Some was extremely secular, from the Enlightenment to ultra-Orthodox. When the Soviet Union occupied Lithuania in June 1940 and annexed it in August 1940, refugees from German-occupied Poland rushed into Lithuania. They were trying to get away from the Nazis. So another 50,000 or more Jews came into Lithuania. And by November 1941, the approximately 40,000 Jews who were still alive were crowded into 4 ghettos in Vilna, Vilnius, Kovno, Kaunas, Šiauliai, and Švenčionis. And in 1943, the Vilna and Švenčionis ghettos were liquidated totally. Kovno and Šiauliai became concentration camps, and about 15,000 Lithuanian Jews who were still alive were deported to labor camps in Lithuania, in Latvia, and Estonia. As Soviet troops advanced in 1944, the German forces that remained in Lithuania deported about 10,000 Lithuanian Jews to camps in Germany. And in the summer of 1944, Soviet troops fully occupied Lithuania. Over 90, maybe as many as 95% of Lithuanian Jews had been murdered, and been murdered mainly in a 3-month period, one of the highest rates of murder in Europe. Father Patrick Dubois, who wrote Holocaust by Bullets, really was talking about Ukraine, but also about Lithuania. The Lithuanian Jews were murdered in their hometowns, in their villages, where they had lived for hundreds of years. And much of the killing, as Silvia told us about the Yom Kippur killing, was on the period between Rosh Hashanah, the Jewish New Year, and Yom Kippur. The Einsatzgruppen and the killing squads and their collaborators, they murdered more than 1 million Jews in the Baltics, Belarus, and Ukraine. And anybody who's been to Ponary, and just a year and a half ago, I went with TOLI for a seminar that we were doing in Vilnius. And we took the teachers, none of them were Jewish. We took them as part of the education to Ponary. It's only 10 kilometers outside of the village, outside of Vilnius. And they were so moved, they were so emotional. And some of them said, we've got to bring our students here. We've never been here before. There and in so many other places. So it's so hard to see with so much documentation available by the Germans, especially by Lithuania, and by investigations and by education of teachers throughout the last 30 years that Lithuania has again become an independent democratic country. And democratic countries become stronger when they face their history honestly, as we have learned this in the United States. Now, before we go to questions, and there are a number of them in the chat box and the Q&A, I want to ask Silvia to come back on screen because I want to ask her a couple of questions. Silvia, tell us some more details about your father. You told us about his signing of these documents, but were you able to learn any more about his collaboration? And how did you and your family react to your finding out this history?
Yeah, I spent a long time talking to one of his colleagues, Damianas Rauka, who was the last living witness at that time in 2013. He has since passed. He was 17 during that uprising, and my grandfather was 29 or 30. And he told me how my grandfather kept going back and forth to Germany, coming back with weapons, coming back with radio, coming back with missives, coming back with plans, and passing this all along. So he was collaborating, and he was part of this Lithuanian Activist Front, which is today, you know, a well-known anti-Semitic group that collaborated with Hitler and the Nazis. And so their main mission was to get rid of the communists. But in between all that, the Jews were called communists. And that was the biggest problem for the Jews, pretty much. You know, layered into just the regular anti-Semitism was this communist idea. And so it sort of gave license to all Lithuanians to you know, make Jews the other and the enemy. And this is how I think everybody sort of got mixed up in this hysteria of thinking it's a patriotic duty.
Well, this is something that I think we know from today, of course, and from the history, that the Soviets took a look at the front, the resistance, and they executed a number of them, including your grandfather. But many Lithuanians also looked at Jews as communists, even though they weren't. No question, there were some Jews who were communists. There were some Jews who were, every part of the political spectrum, but that did not make them anti-Lithuanian. It did not make them enemies of the state, which is what the front looked at. Now, you went back home to Chicago. How did your family take this? How did your cousin, you lived in an area of Chicago that is heavily Lithuanian. You told them the history that they believed was not true.
Yeah, it didn't go over well. My father was very upset about it, but he finally came to understand the story. I let him read the book before it was published, and his statement was, "Why does it have to be you? Why does it have to be the granddaughter? Why couldn't it just be like a historian, another historian?" And I think in general, the Lithuanians here in Chicago, most do not know. Most just do not want to know, and have been fed for so long that Lithuanians were the victims of the Soviet occupation and of the Nazi occupation, that they just cannot believe that they were victimizing Jews.
One moment, please.
And so that was a big shock for me too. And this took me a long time to get over, I kind of went into depression over it. Like, I was traumatized by this. So I totally understand why Lithuanians are having a hard time with this, because I did. And I don't think I would have done this if it weren't for that deathbed promise that my mom gave me, and it just started taking a life of its own.
Well, I think that we find this any place, including in the United States, when you believe a certain narrative, a certain myth that has become accepted, that you have to, and it has to be changed, that it really is a difficult thing to accept. You're a high school teacher. Do you teach this history in that class, in your classes? Do you tell them about your grandfather and about Lithuania and about your search for the truth?
I do. Well, I'm an English teacher. I'm not a history teacher. So, but every chance I get, I give them an update of what's going on with the book. I'm always teaching reading and writing, and I think it's exciting for them to see a teacher coming out with a book. I would stop class every now and then, and we would read the New York Times article or the Chicago Tribune article, or show a video about the story. First of all, I have to show them where Lithuania is on a map, because they have no idea. So there's that. And then, teaching them about World War II history is something too. I mean, most of them were not even alive when the Twin Towers fell. So let alone World War II. But I do. I tell them about it, and I have, like I said, I've been with the story for 20 years. So I've been talking to hundreds of students about this.
Do you find that, and I know that students look to the internet, and they look to WhatsApp and other applications and their cell phones to get all of the information, and YouTube that tells them about the truth of today. Well, do you find that is distorting the history of Lithuania, that is also increasing the Holocaust denial and countering the message of the truth that we're trying to bring to students?
I don't know. I know that they rely on the internet a little bit too much. They're less likely to read books than previous generations were. I think just for them, it's a matter of trying to bring it to today's terms, something that happened 80 years ago. Why is it important today? And, I basically just talk to them about what is going on with the government of Lithuania today. and how the government has, the irony, and here's the English teacher in me, the irony of my grandfather being lauded a hero is the downfall of Lithuania. If they had just not made him a hero, I think it would just be something that's 80 years old. But because he was made such a hero, and because the school is, named after him, and he's got this cross of Vitus that my mother left me, it's and the streets, and just all of that was created, I think, to hide his role in the Holocaust, because there's so much what I call the heroic side of him and fighting against the communists, which is wonderful. It's wonderful. But it was used to obscure what was happening with the Holocaust. And I have to say that growing up in Chicago, nobody ever talked about the Holocaust to me. I went to Lithuanian school on Saturdays, missed all the cartoons from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. And, I heard lots and lots of stories about how the communists sent lots of Lithuanians to Siberia, and I had family members sent there too. And that's all I ever heard about is the Siberian concentration camps, which are terrible. But we never talked about the Holocaust.
Well, that's true in many schools. I went to Jewish schools and they didn't talk about it either. In fact, growing up in many communities, Jewish communities, in the 1950s, parents would tell their children, don't ask, these were refugees or survivors who came into the community, don't ask them about that tattoo on their arm. Don't bring up that history of where they were born. They don't want to know about that. But today we have so many Holocaust survivors who have shared their stories, their histories. And I think, you as a teacher, and even though you're an English teacher, literature is a way of bringing a message also to students. And one of our audience has said, how can we as Holocaust educators, a teacher, link individual lives and biographies to the larger history? What kinds of teaching methods do you think might work best for them?
Well, I always like to start with a good book. And so, there's so many books out there. One book that I taught was Parallel Journeys, which was kind of put in the journeys of the victim and the perpetrator and how they met. And so by getting through the book, it just allows for so many wonderful discussions in the classroom. And I ask them to identify with characters, even characters that they might be uncomfortable with identifying with, and then taking that position and empathizing with it and trying to understand how things happened. And so I like those rich discussions kind of grounded in literature, pulling quotes from the text and maybe sending them out to do additional research, and always coming back with these, I love these Socratic style discussions where, it's kind of a very structured discussion where they're kind of forced to say something, even the shy ones. So I love that, because then you really get a window into what they're thinking about.
I know that in a number of cities in Germany, teachers who are not Jewish and trying to teach the Holocaust have their students research the lives of people who used to live in that town or village, and to try to bring that back alive again. That could be possibly one way. But let me get back to your family also. Your mother, when you confronted her, she believed that your grandfather was a hero. She was, and before she died, do you think that she knew the truth?
I never confronted her. I never had the chance to, because, when she asked me to do the story, I just believed that he was a wonderful hero, and that was it. So it was only after her death that I asked her, questions in my mind, I guess, and how she would answer. I think where I have landed today is I think she must have heard the rumor, what I call the rumors, except it's more than rumor now. I think she heard them, and I think she went into denial. And I think I followed in her footsteps up to the idea of exonerating him. I have a feeling she must have gone there too. But then she would have not turned the corner to find out the horrible information. And I know, that if she were alive and my grandmother were alive, there's no way on God's green earth I would have been able to write the story. There's no way.
One person has asked, does the school, which has the monument to your grandfather's memory, and know about your book? And would you be welcome back there, do you think?
I don't know. TOLI wanted me to go to Lithuania a couple years ago, and I had to be disinvited because it was just too controversial for me to be there. And that was even before the book was out. I think after the New York Times op-ed, things maybe are shifting a little bit. For some reason, that New York Times op-ed is like, oh, if it got in the New York Times, it might be true. One good thing, I thought, when I was writing my book, that Lithuania would be the last country on earth to ask for translation. I sincerely thought this, like they would just never want to do it. So 2 weeks ago, a publisher in Lithuania has asked to translate the book. So that's a really good sign.
No, I think that somebody says, can you imagine the Stolperstein, these stumbling stones, these little brass monuments that are not just in Germany, they're in about 13 different countries now, in front of homes where Jews used to live. Do you think that might help in bringing Lithuanians to identify in a more concrete way with that history?
They have a lot of those stones to create, 200,000.
They have a lot, there's no question about that. A few years ago, I went to Švenčionis, which was one of the largest ghettos in Lithuania. And there was a group from that community, from the high school together with a college in the United States, that were together building a Holocaust memorial at the small Jewish cemetery that had not been desecrated. And that's one way of getting students involved in the community. Let me see if there's some other questions.
I think it's a great idea. I like the idea.
Yeah.
I know that there's some TV shows now that are investigating the Jewish life in Lithuania. People are sending me links to that. That is rather new, because there are hardly any Jews left.
So there are about 3,000 Jews left in Lithuania.
They call themselves the 5%.
Mm-hmm.
The 5% that survived, or descendants of the survivors.
Yeah, we have a couple of questions. One of the things is by Toshimi, why did so many Lithuanians believe and support Nazi ideology?
Well, they hate communists. That's the big thing.
But before communism, even before 1917, before.
Well, it was Russia before communism too. Right. They hated Russia. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, Russia has always had its eye on Lithuania and occupied it and took it over. If it wasn't Russia, it was Germany. And if it wasn't Germany, it was Poland. So, they just want to be left alone and have their own independence and freedom. So, but when it was the Russians again under a new name, communism, they thought that Germany, they would fight along with Germany, and Germany would help them beat the Russians and then make Lithuania free again. Mm-hmm. So they were led to believe this. And, maybe I think they were naive, and but I guess they had no choice other than to believe it. And so, as soon as the Russians were gone, the Germans were like, sorry, we're going to keep Lithuania for ourselves too.
Mhm.
And so the Lithuanians did take that as a big betrayal of the Germans.
Now, you're an English teacher. Do you use, say, the Diary of Anne Frank or other books in your curriculum for the students?
Well, Diary of Anne Frank now is like a middle school at this point. I love that book. It's one of my favorite books. And I used to teach the Elie Wiesel book, but that now is in The Night. But that is now in middle school. They keep getting younger and younger with the good books. So the book that I teach now with my freshmen is Survivors Club.
Mhm.
He was one of the last. He was a kid in a picture who was a survivor from Auschwitz in this iconic photograph. And his daughter works for the NBC, and she kind of wrote the story with him. And so I teach that one.
One more question. Someone brings up the 1930s nationalism and anti-Semitism was very prevalent, not just in Germany, but in Poland, Lithuania, in fact, France, and even in the United States. We had Father Kaufman here, Henry Ford, who was also spreading anti-Semitism through the Dearborn Independent newspaper that he owned. How does Chicago, as a city, because it's in the Midwest, there was a lot of anti-Semitism there. Father Kaufman's broadcasts in the 1930s and early 1940s were very popular. Does anybody talk about him or about that period in history? That's one part of it. And the other part is you're very lucky in Chicago. You have an excellent Holocaust museum. In Skokie, do the students of the various high schools go there? I can't, during the pandemic, of course, they can't do that. But have they been going there and holding classes and meeting with survivors?
You know, that would have the history teachers would have done that. And so before the pandemic, I do believe that at least in our high school, they must have taken a trip to Skokie and the Holocaust Museum. I know my son, his grammar school took them there. And I know that for their 8th grade trip, they ended up going to Washington, D.C. to the U.S. Holocaust Museum as kind of like the class trip. So definitely just so many resources here. I do agree with that.
I think we're getting towards the end of time. Let me see, I think that we could probably have one more question. Well, let me ask you one more question, then we'll turn back to Mark and any other comments that you might have. There's a very large Jewish community in Chicago, as well as a very large Lithuanian and other ethnic group community, Polish, Ukrainians. Chicago is a very ethnic city. Do the ethnicities, do the communities ever get together to have conversations, honest conversations about life today and the past? Or should they?
I don't think so.
Should they?
I think that they should. You know, being Lithuanian, I did not meet Lithuanian Jews until I started working on the story. And, you know, there's lots of events for Lithuanians here, and I think it would be very educational to have a combined event between the Litvaks, who are the Lithuanian Jews, and the Lithuanians, and just have an honest conversation about that. I think that would be a beautiful thing.
I think you're right. I think that's a wonderful note to conclude the discussion on and turn it back to Mark.
Hi. I just want to add a little bit. I was fortunate to be with Arthur in Vilnius almost 2 years ago. And I didn't hear a lot of good things, but the reason that TOLI decided to go in there is because we felt that the environment was right to teach the teachers about what happened. And if you teach the teachers, one teacher can teach 200 kids, 200 students. So we went there, and you're right, we were trying to bring you with us. This was right after the article in Chicago appeared and with your story. And we felt resistance from the groups in Lithuania that basically deal with the crimes of the Nazis and the Soviets. And when I mentioned that I would like to bring you over there, they said that would be a good idea, but I think maybe you should bring a person who believes in denial. And I said, as long as I'm around, a person that believes in denial is not going to be with me in the same room. So we shelved the idea. We met with the American ambassador at the end of the seminar, and we brought up the idea. And he said that the first seminar was a good idea not to do it, but the next seminar that you have, do it. So a couple of months ago, I got in touch with the same person who was involved with the crimes of the Nazis and the Soviets. And I said to him, and I don't want to mention names, I said, we would like to bring Silvia, and everybody in Lithuania knows you, good or bad.
Bad.
And he said to me, Mark, I think it's a very good idea. We are a very transparent country now, and I think that that's exactly what we need. So I got in touch with you, and I was glad to basically to hear that you would be coming with us later on this year. I think the teachers, they don't know what, a lot of them, like you said, are young and they're not familiar. I think that story has to be told. You can't forget it. And if you wanna have a better world, you got to look at the past in order to have a better future. Arthur, thank you. And Silvia, thank you for sharing the very powerful story with us. We hope that you speak at the TOLI teacher seminars around the US and Europe. And like I mentioned, the seminar in Lithuania later on in October that you promised you will join us. I want to thank the audience for participating and listening. And a video of this program will be shared in the coming days. Silvia, thank you so much. I read your book, and it's a very powerful book, and I thank you for it. Good
Thank you,
night,
Mark.
and we'll be in touch.
And thank you,
Sounds great.
Sylvia.
Thank you.
Thank you, Arthur.